Hi everyone.
Hi everyone.
The topic for
Is
today is accountability. Okay, this is a brief overview of what we discussed last week. And let's move on to accountability directly. So for this week, we will compare the two different views regarding accountability by first Carl Friedrich and second Hermann Feiner. They tried to find answers to the question, what should be the accountability of public administration? So let's begin with the Carl Friedrich. The focus of Friedrich was the relationship between ministers and public servants. In this relationship, the ministers indicate politicians who are members of a cabinet either by election to seats and selection for cabinet or is appointed to cabinet by an elected politicians. In other words, it is a position sprint from the political processes, meaning that it involves political processes like election. Administrators, on the other hand, is a professional public servant. It is a position achieved through appointment by open and competitive processes against the public. Also, they have published criteria focused on the technical capacity to do the job required. This means they are bureaucrats based on meritocracy. You see the difference here. He focused on the tension between attention of accountability and responsibility between ministers and other ministers. Let's see Friedrich's first point. He argued that a responsible person gives a rational account to be given. He viewed that a responsible person is the one who is answerable for his or her acts to some other person or body who has to give an account of his doings and therefore must be able to conduct himself rationally. In other words, Frederick trusted people's rationality and people who can properly provide explanation for his or her doings is the meaning of a responsiveness, which would make them behave in a rational way. As a sense of a duty of public servants for accountability includes a profession, one's own conscience, or the public interests. For public servants, three major points for their accountability include their profession, consciences, or the public interest. Then let's see his second point. He said the supervision of elected legislatures and chief executives has been no more successful in controlling the details of public administration. So, according to Frederick, the current system that allows legislature and chief executives, such as president, to monitor public administration is not effectively controlling public administration. According to Frederick, political responsibility based upon the election of a legislature and chief executives succeeded in permitting a highly technical government service any more than religious responsibility of a well-intended king. In other words, he thought that politicians cannot oversee technical details of the work of public servants. The reason is that the work done by public servants can only be understood by anyone but specialists. Think about technical pension system or tax or real estates. Politicians, their term is limited by the election, while for public servants, their job is secured legally. The result is the power leverage of public servants. From their experience, from the knowledge they obtained from their long year experience and the specialized knowledge accumulated with their experience. And because of the reason, he argued that ministers should not direct the work of the public servants, since much of it is highly technical, best left to the experts. His third point is that policy and administration are uh, are blended together in practice, making policy dependent on administrative knowledge of technical details and likewise administration involved in political judgments about what can be done and what cannot be done in the social context. He focused on what happens in the reality, while theorists like Wilson indicates the separation of policy and administration. Frederick He viewed that administration is more powerful from their technical knowledge. He thought that because of the reasons, administration is not neutral, but they suggest political judgments of what the society should do. So, for example, of building a bridge, it is not just an infrastructure, but it is about the willingness of people to use the bridge and manage social disruption that caused the processes. And because of the reason, the flow between politics and administration is to be two-way. So in the Franklin Roosevelt administration in 1930s, many of the services had the technical elements understood directly by the ministers and only in outline by ministers. So Frederick Heath's next point is to educate and motivate officials to act responsibly by increasing their professionalism. He viewed that bureaucrats become inevitably technical and scientific. These aspects of many of them and the complexity of interactions among activities combined to limit political supervision. He thought that neither the electorate nor the legislative assemblies can effectively bring out responsible conduct by close supervision. According to his view, these kinds of monitoring is at best to keep government from doing wrong, but not effective in having public administration more responsible. He thought training, education, and conditions of employment would give independence of a semi-judicial kind. Okay, so that was about Friedrich Hayek. And let's look at the Hermann Feiner's view. Hermann Feiner had a different view. So his main point is that responsibility involves a relationship of obedience to an external controlling authority. He thought the responsibility exists within the relationship of another that involves at least two actors. One has to show obedience to another that has controlling authority. Further, he thought because a sense of a duty of a public servants toward the profession one's own consensus or the public interest seem abstract. A sense of a duty should be, and because of the reason, he thought a sense of a duty should be obedience to explicit direction. So, in his views, the function and the role of politics and public administration were sharply distinguished, where politics is in charge of direct administration and administration is to obey to the direction of politics. Just like what democratic society intended to be designed. Feiner suggested that ministers do supervise administrators in detail as both a matter of fact and a norm. So, in Feiner's view, control of politics over administration should be strengthened as they are already effectively doing so. So responsibility is an arrangement of a correction and punishment, including dismissal, in that minister must supervise administrators in the name of democracy as the elected representatives of the people. He trusted the logic of representative democracy and valued the legitimacy of politicians in making decisions based on the will of citizens. It is the politician's role that closely monitor administration as they are the representative of citizens. Politicians and employees are working not for the goods of the public in the sense of what the public needs, but of the wants of the public as expressed by the public. He believed that election expressed what the public want. Thus, the exact obedience to those orders is necessary to make public administrators subservient to the elected assembly. So, for Feiner, the ideal public servants are something like a robot that lacks a will of its own, and wholly and only obedient of the political master, who in turn is responsible to the citizenry at the ballot box. It emphasized on the neutrality of bureaucrats like Max Weber, and the only accountability that administration has is the accountability towards politicians. He thought there is a chain of responsibility. The minister works for the electorate. The public servants work for the minister. The minister is responsible to the electorate, and the public servant is accountable to the minister. A public servant is not entrusted with any greater responsibility to the public interest or common good that transcends the minister of the day. So, according to Feiner, administrators decide the needs of the citizens are beyond their accountability scope. So, as a summary, we will look at the two different approaches towards accountability by Friedrich and Feiner. Friedrich emphasized that the blend of politics and administration in reality and the reliance of politics on administration is increasing due to the technical complexity that gives power leverage to administration. Thus, administration should be more accountable to their professionalism, as monitoring of politics could be less effective. And through education, they can achieve their responsibility that can also lead to political judgments. Feiner, on the other hand, emphasized on the separation of administration and politics. He valued the idea of representative democracy and focused on the monitoring of politics over administration. Administration's accountability is toward electorate, according to his argument. So for this week, we compare the two different views of accountability, first by Friedrich and second by Feiner. So, in a short way of explaining the different approach between two scholars is that Carl Friedrich focused on internal accountability of a public administration, in other words, bureaucrats. However, Hermann Feiner, he focused on external accountability of the public administration, or again, in other words, bureaucrats. So internal accountability means that bureaucrats, they should be responsible for their own behaviors. And according to Friedrich's view, he thought that it can be achieved through the education. And he specified this accountability as accountability towards professionalism. And according to the Feiner's view, he thought the accountability of public administration arose from its relationship with external actors like electorate, politicians who are elected by the citizens, which gives them the legitimacy of their position of order. So Feiner, he did not thought that bureaucrats can behave appropriately or responsibly without external control. So in Feiner's view, the way of having the bureaucrats more accountable is through detailed monitoring of electorate. So you see the difference between the two, right? So this debate like was very famous in public administration history, and this debate influenced a lot to the future researchers. So again, the important thing is bureaucrats should be accountable. I mean, that's, I mean, like, I'm pretty sure that no one can deny the fact. However, the problem and the issue is accountability of what? Or accountability to whom? So that issue is also started from this debate of bureaucrats' accountability. Okay, so for today, this is it, and let's meet at the class for more discussion.